The book is an anthology, I suppose, of the various things that I've written over the last 10 years, and is a follow-up to Writing Home, which was a similar sort of anthology. This one is probably more revelatory than the other one. The first piece in the book, the longest piece, is about a sudden depression that my mother suffered in late middle age, and of the revelations that came about in consequence of that. Has there been any other mental illness in your family? No, I say confidently, and Dad turns the trilby in his hands. Anyway, says Mr. Parr kindly, but with what the three of us know is more tact than truth, depression isn't really mental illness. I see it all the time. Mr. Parr sees it all the time because he is the mental health welfare officer for the Craven district. And late this September evening in 1966, Dad and I are sitting in his bare linoleum-floored office above Settle Police Station, while he takes a history of my mother. So, there's never been anything like this before? No, I say, and without doubt or hesitation. After all, I'm the educated one in the family. I've been to Oxford. Well, Dad says, and the information is meant for me as much as Mr. Parr, she did have something once, just before we were married, and he looks at me apologetically. The onset of the depression coincided with my parents' retirement to a village in the Dales, a place so small and close-knit that such bizarre behaviour could not be hidden. Indeed, it was partly the knowledge that they were about to leave the relative anonymity of the city for a small community where folks knew all your business, and that she would henceforth be socially much more visible than she was used to. I'm the centrepiece here, that might have brought on the depression in the first place, or so Mr. Parr is saying. Wanting to go unnoticed was what Mum's depression was about. So it was hardly surprising that when Dad revealed that there'd been something similar in the past, it should have been on the eve of her wedding, an occasion when there could be no going unnoticed either. There came a point, Dad told me, when they nearly broke off their engagement because neither of them could see a way of getting over this first necessary hurdle. Eventually, Dad sought the advice of the local vicar. The Reverend H. Lovell Clark is just the kind of figure, very better class, to make Dad nervous and tongue-tied. What he has come along to ask is whether the vicar will marry them at 7:30 in the morning, with no fuss, no congregation, and in time for Dad to get to work at Lower Wortley Co-op by 8:15. Lovell Clark says this is out of the question. The law does not permit him to marry anyone before 8 in the morning. The vicar said, well, surely if you asked at the co-op, they would give you an extra quarter of an hour off and that I can marry you at 8 and you'd be at work by 8:30. And my father went and asked, and they said no, he couldn't have a quarter of an hour off, which still, I mean, I don't know, 60, 70 years later still seems to me monstrous. My father, I suspect, gives up at this point, but the vicar does not, and indeed comes up with a solution that is ingenious, even cheeky. To begin with, they are to present themselves at the church at 7:30 the following morning, at which time the vicar will say the whole wedding service up to, but not including, the vows, thus complying with the law. Then on the stroke of 8, the vows themselves can be said, the ring put on, and this young butcher still have time to get to work by 8:15. And on the 28th of September 1928, that is how it is done. Dad goes off to work, Mam goes home, and in the evening, in lieu of a honeymoon, they get tickets for the Theatre Royal to see the Desert Song. My mother's sisters were Kathleen and Lemira, both residents at Gilpin Place. Kathleen the oldest, Lemira the youngest, my mother Lillian the one in the middle. That was the trouble, she used to say of her childhood. I got it from both sides. Returning after the war from India on HMS Northway in 1946, Auntie Myra brings with her all the spoils of the East. Even her suitcases are souvenirs. Natural pigskin, hand-stitched. I knocked him right down. Don't let's get landed with the photographs, Dad would warn as we trail up from Tong Road. But since they're invariably on hand to flesh out some anecdote of her military career that Auntie Myra is anxious to recount, there's seldom any escape. I am 12 when I first see these albums. One of the albums in particular fascinates me, and even today it falls open at the place. It has a photo, postcard size, of two Australian soldiers, Geordie and Ossie. It is Ossie who draws the eye, better looking with his arms folded and smiling, and with some reason, as he's weighed down, practically overbalanced, by what, even in the less than skimpy bathing trunks of the time, is a package of enormous proportions. The bathing costume, in effect, just a hammock in which is lolling this colossal member. Underneath, Auntie has written roguishly, "Yes, girls, it's all real." It was only on Tuesday he drove us over to Morecambe, Mum said. It was miserable all day, only it fined up at tea time, so we thought we'd have a run out. Will it be all the driving to the hospital that's done it? I said I didn't think so, though I did. We went up to the West End by the golf course. I wanted a bit of a walk on the sands, but we'd only been going a minute when he said, "Nay, ma'am, you'll have to stop. I can't go any further." It must have been coming on then. I knew exactly the place where they would have been walking. It was up towards Bear, the suburb of Morecambe, always thought a bit more select. We'd walked on the same sands often, particularly during the war. For Dad there was scarcely a holiday at all, as with no one to stand in for him at the co-op, he never managed more than a couple of days. Having seen him off on the train, the three of us would walk on the empty evening sands as the sun set across the bay, and Mam wept and wept. For what? It was love, I suppose, and the loneliness of a week with her two uncomforting boys. So that these sands, where she'd wept so bitterly and grieved so needlessly, should now be the setting for their last walk together seems, if not fitting, then at least symmetrical. The disproportionate grief then, finding its appropriate object 40 years later, the equation complete.